Hello. Hi. Thank you all for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening. We are so excited today to have an esteemed group with us to present the findings of the 2024 Sandpiper Global Reputation Capital Index. This report is an effort to showcase to leaders the importance of reputation and reputation management. Today, we will be focused on both presenting some of the results of that research, as well as driving a panel discussion with many of our colleagues that are on the line in order to unpack what the results mean for us as communicators and corporate affairs leaders, but also what they mean for the broader state of reputation management within businesses. Within the research and the agenda for today, we will focus on a few things. So as we get started, what we are going to be doing is looking at an overview of the study, of the research, and who we spoke with. We will give you an introduction to the methodology of the research as well. We will then do a short overview of the findings of the research and some of the insights and headline points that we found quite interesting. But the majority of the session will be focused on a panel that will be led by Diana Marzalesk, our moderator from Provoke Media. Diana, would you like to do a quick introduction?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. I'm happy to be here. As Michael said, I am Diana Marzalek. I oversee much of the editorial work for Provoke Media, and just looking forward to delving into this important subject after your presentation, Michael.
Great. Thank you so much. As I mentioned, in addition to myself and Diana, we are also joined by Lucy Holloway, who is the head of external communications for LSEG, London Stock Exchange Group, where she oversees the team that's responsible for delivering the group's global communication strategies. In addition, we are joined by Mark Kita, PhD, who is the Vice President of Public Affairs at Pharma, where he leads strategic initiatives, including strategic planning, insights, industry reputation and positioning, and value communications. So as I mentioned, we are so excited about the research this year because this is the first time ever, after fielding research on reputation for the past 5 years, that we have actually shifted the lens. Given all of the complexities of the landscape, rather than talking to consumers and the general public about their views on reputation, this is the first time ever that we have actually gone and talked to C-suite leaders. We've spoken with over 2,700 leaders whose companies are headquartered in 27 different markets across Asia Pacific, Europe and the UK, Middle East and Africa, and the Americas. You can see some of the criteria that we included here. The reason that we wanted to speak with these individuals is we wanted to understand the connection between reputation and business success. And even more than that, we wanted to understand where organizations are succeeding in managing their reputation, what challenges they are facing, and where the opportunities are for leaders and for organizations to improve their reputation management and ultimately improve their commercial success. So for the research, we've divided this into two main parts. We are first going to talk about the overarching reputation landscape and some of the insights that we have about what leaders are facing today. And then we'll talk about the reputation index, looking at 9 areas of reputation management to judge the performance of different organizations and see what strategies and tactics are most essential in driving performance. So first, one of the things that was very heartening about the study is that nearly all of the leaders that we talked to said that reputation is important to commercial success. On the left-hand side, you can see that over 2 and 3 noted that it's very important. This number shoots up to 9 and 10 when we look at net importance. Throughout the study today, given most of our audience is from the Americas and Europe, you'll see additional stats beyond the global stats, comparing some of those differences. In addition to reputation being important to commercial success, we also saw that most organizations and their leaders rate themselves as strong performers. They are leading or similar to their industry peers. If we think about the statistics, this isn't possible. Someone needs to be leading, someone needs to be trailing. So hence the reason that we wanted to look at the Reputation Capital Index to understand what that performance really looks like. Beyond understanding whether reputation was important, we also wanted to understand who within an organization owns reputation and is responsible for it. As you can see, we did categorize the leaders that we spoke with into 3 areas: CEO, other C-suite leaders, and corporate affairs leaders. And it was resounding that CEOs across all of the regions actually had the highest ownership and the highest responsibility for reputation. And they also thought that their performance is linked to reputation management goals. For other C-suite leaders and corporate affairs leaders, we saw lower levels of responsibility, but nonetheless, many of these leaders did note that reputation is an important facet of their role within their organizations. Within reputation, we looked at 6 different pillars: citizenship, cyber and data security, leadership and governance, corporate and financial performance, products and services, and employee experience. And what we found was that while leaders rated some of these higher than others, all of them are actually critical to reputation performance. Organizations need to be focusing not just on their corporate performance and products, but also on employees, on citizenship, on cyber and data security, and on governance. Whenever we looked at what was important versus where organizations found themselves to be strong, what we found was that there was a bit of a gap. Again, corporate and financial performance across regions and globally came out as the area that most leaders found themselves to be strong, whereas there was more opportunity, especially in some of the markets that you can see here, to improve the results around citizenship. We also, given that we had this amazing data from 27 markets, wanted to understand what the geography of a corporation's headquarters means for reputation. And overall, we found that especially in the Americas and Europe, it was very important and generally positively impacts reputation. So the geographic location gives an organization an ability to manage their reputation in that area, but also to manage their reputation globally. This isn't to say that the picture is all rosy. We also looked at several issues in the way that they impact the commercial performance of business. It was quite shocking that we found, but over 2/3, nearly 3/4 of businesses said that their business had been impacted by lack of reputational strength over the past 12 months. The reasons for this at the front and center were ability to do business with customers and in specific markets, but we also saw issues arising due to talent retention and recruitment and ability to recover from a crisis that were driven by lack of reputational strength. Some of the issues that leaders highlighted that were most concerning to them were a host of different things, ranging from technology, such as AI and misinformation and disinformation, to rising geopolitical tensions and newsroom consolidation within the media landscape. You can see between the first and second columns that there's actually a very big delta between the leaders who are very concerned about these issues and those that are highly prepared. What this means is that while there is a lot of risk in the landscape, leaders don't necessarily feel prepared to deal with those risks. For audiences, what we found was that leaders needed to have strong insights in order to be able to influence audiences and to be able to shape the opinions and perceptions of audience expectations. Across the top, you can see that employees, customers, and government and regulators were some of the areas where organizations had the strongest insights and also drove the deepest influence. However, across all stakeholder groups that we looked at, the ability to generate insights about audiences influence the ability to shape their perceptions on reputation. We also wanted to understand the way in which leaders are preparing for the future. So we looked at where they are investing in the future, and we saw that reputation management strategy, executive profiling, as well as other areas such as the digital footprint and AI, financial reporting, and reputation measurement all came out as key areas for investment in the future. Finally, we wanted to understand the advice that leaders are getting from their internal teams as well as from their agencies. And what we saw was that there is a consistent need for better advice on reputation. Across the board, we saw between 1/3 and 1/2 of leaders note that they are receiving strong advice, which means that nearly 2/3 of leaders are not receiving strong advice, and counsel to those leaders could be improved. So based on this landscape, we also took a look at those 9 pillars of reputation and created an index for each of them. We looked at over 50 variables across 9 different areas of reputation, and we scored each of these based on several questions, ranging from, does the organization have a strategy for this area of reputation management? Does the organization have a clear owner? And are trainings and tactics in place for these leaders to execute in a proficient way? So rather than just asking about their strength in reputation management, we wanted to understand, do they have the fundamentals in place to actually manage their organization's reputation? What we saw was that while all 9 areas of reputation were ranked as important, again, there was a gap between importance and execution, between strategy and execution. So nearly 9 and 10 ranked each of these as important. However, we only saw about 2 and 5 mentioning that each of these was an area of strong performance. So we wanted to double click on each to understand what some of the headlines were. For reputation strategy, we saw the second highest number of trailblazers here. And this is because leaders have strategies in place and they have strong ownership, but the other half of leaders that fall into the aspirants, followers, or beginners categories actually have work to do in defining their corporate narrative as clear, differentiated, compelling, effective, and accurate, and making sure that it aligns with an organization's vision, mission, values, and purpose. In addition, this definition of narrative potentially can help improve stakeholders' perceptions of these different organizations, because today only 41% of leaders believe that their stakeholders have high awareness and understanding of their corporate narrative. As we talk through, we do have the 4 categories on the left that I just mentioned. The trailblazers are the top 25% of respondents who have strong strategy in place and strong execution tactics across all areas. Aspirants have strong strategies in place in most places and are executing against those in most places. Followers have a mixed bag where they do have strong strategy and tactics in place in some areas, but are lacking in others. And for beginners, these are defined as leaders in organizations where they are just getting started and only have a few strategies and tactics in place. We also looked at ESG and sustainability strategy, and you can see the story shifts pretty significantly here. This was one of the lowest percentage of trailblazers that we saw across the study. What we saw was that there's also a very high percentage of beginners. While ESG and sustainability strategy is important, it lacks clear targets, and also it does not have a dedicated internal team. In fact, only 13% of leaders noted that there's a dedicated team to own this area of reputation. Likewise, when it comes to climate communications, some of the execution tactics are not in place, with only 29% noting that they have a climate communication strategy and 12% noting that they have defined climate communications messaging. Crisis management saw the highest percentage of trailblazers of all of the reputation areas that we looked at. And this is because crisis plans are in place, organizations are doing regular trainings, and they are trying to get prepared given the fact that there is so much volatility in the market. However, one of the key takeaways here is that with all this planning, only 44% of leaders are actually confident that when an issue arises, that they will be able to mitigate that issue and effectively manage a crisis. When it comes to executive profiling and thought leadership, you can see that the majority of respondents actually fell in the aspirants and followers categories. And this was because there's acknowledgement that executive activity and thought leadership builds trust, but we saw that there was a gap, again, between strategy, building that trust, and execution, getting recognized for their efforts. So while 95% say that thought leadership is effective in building trust, only 38% feel their organization is recognized for that thought leadership. So there's absolutely an opportunity to connect that execution with the return on investment and the value when it comes to thought leadership. For media engagement, you'll remember earlier that the consolidating newsroom is one of the key areas of concerns and one area that leaders are not necessarily prepared to deal with. And across the study, across markets that we looked at, leaders believe there's opportunity here. You can see that over 2/3 say that their organizations are not engaging with the media enough. And while there is training in place, and it's often mandatory for spokespeople, leaders do note that the quality of their spokespeople could be improved, and the end results of communications with the media could more accurately portray their organizations. We'll talk about this a bit more later. When it comes to AI and digital profiling, you'll remember from the crisis section that we noted that this is an area where many issues arise for leaders. We saw that this generally stems from a lack of understanding. Only 38% of leaders have a strong understanding of how generative AI tools can affect the way that they interact with and influence content. And more than 8 in 10 leaders are facing a range of digital reputation issues: low search rankings, mis and disinformation, quality control, manipulated media, and deep fakes. For employee communications, we saw a fairly even spread across trailblazers, aspirants, followers, and beginners, but we also saw that there's a need for focus and alignment. It was surprising to learn that across digital channels, internal communication channels, websites, town halls, organizations have on average nearly 12 different internal communications channels. In addition, there's a lack of alignment between the communications team responsible for these employee communications and human resources. And as a result of this, only 41% actually think that their employees are able to communicate how their roles contribute to corporate strategy. For financial communications, again, this is a prioritized area for leaders. We saw a high percentage of trailblazers, but there's an opportunity to better understand investors and shareholders in driving more effective financial communications. And as a result of this, we saw that only 39% are very satisfied with their performance in financial communications targeted towards capital raising. The final area that we looked at was government and regulatory affairs. For this, we saw, again, most respondents fell into the aspirants and followers category. And this largely had to do with a lack of frequency and a lack of relationships when it comes to communications. Most leaders that we surveyed do have some form of stakeholder mapping for these key audiences in place, but they don't have comprehensive approaches. They think that their engagement on policy is insufficient. And as a result of this, they lack the influence that they need to change the perspectives of these key stakeholders. So based on this research, you'll see that there's a lot of really interesting data, a lot of areas for opportunity. And for the majority of the session, we now want to turn to focus, and I will pass the microphone to Diana, where we can go through a few questions and understand some real life examples about what this data means for leaders. Over to you, Diana.
You, Michael. That's so interesting, especially weighing some of the importance, the acknowledged importance of reputation, and then the lack of strength or strategy in that area, and the opportunity that comes with that. So we have real life panelists here to help us understand that, and the role of corporate comms and corporate affairs and comms leaders in shaping reputation. So first, I'm going to throw a question out to both you, Lucy and Mark. A persistent theme observed through the research is a strategy to action gap. For example, while more than 9 out of 10 believe that areas of reputation are important, less than half of their organization's reputations are as strong as they think they should be. Why do you think this is? Should corporate affairs leads target to take on more responsibility? And if so, how should they go about doing this? Who wants to take this first? Lucy?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to sort of speak. I mean, I think, first of all, I think the one thing I'd highlight is that I'm quite pleased that, people recognize the importance of reputation, and the numbers sort of clearly reflect that. I think I'm sort of, quite surprised by corporate affairs leaders feeling that they don't have ownership of that. Certainly in my role in the organization and stuff, it's one of the most important lenses that we always work through, working in a very highly regulated, publicly listed company. We are often the gatekeepers and the filters to actually help protect that reputation, and to ask questions internally as to how things might be perceived outside. So I do think it's something that corporate affairs leaders should feel very much empowered to challenge their senior stakeholders with, and certainly something that is certainly a day-to-day thing from our perspective. So more to do, but I think corporate affairs should feel that they have ownership of that type of area.
And not to interrupt, but why do you think they don't then? Is it?
Well, I was very surprised by the numbers when I saw them, because I think that while there is an importance, maybe they feel that there's an ultimate buck stops with someone, and that being a CEO or whatever. But I think increasingly and in a good way, corporate affairs have a seat at the top table and are part of executive management teams, and therefore hopefully ownership over time will build into that.
And of course, I understand you cannot speak to these people in other companies, but curious your thoughts. And Mark?
No, I had I appreciated that take there. I was kind of encouraged by that number, and I think I attribute it to two things. One, you've mentioned this earlier, is the increasingly complex environment, which I think for any business leader, they recognize that despite, it doesn't matter how much planning you put, like you have some level of humility to say that the world is very difficult out there, and I can put all the best plans in place, and I'll still have to pivot very quickly. And so what I see the difference between the importance and confidence gap is fundamentally about humility. But, I also looked in this data point, this question, and I asked this myself, is, you start with your controllables. If you're operating in this increasingly complex environment, and when thinking about reputation management, you start with, what's important to you, like accountability. Do you have a point of contact across all of these functions? Do you invest the time? Do you have clear strategy, objectives? Do you follow up with your measurement? Are you reporting that out? Like, it's like that old adage, show me your budget and you'll see my priorities. And so when it comes to reputation management, I think the central idea here is, what's important to you, making sure that you've got clear accountability, clear strategy, clear pull through, you're tracking metrics, that at least gives you a sense that like I'm controlling, I have control over the things that I can control. Like I might not be able to predict everything that's going to happen in the environment, but at least I'm managing my house well. I think that broadly explains the disconnect between those two numbers.
The research also highlights several issues that leaders are concerned about and are making reputation management more complex, ranging from mis and disinformation to geopolitics. While leaders have crisis and issues management strategies in place, they also indicate gross unpreparedness to tackle these issues. What are your views on this? And what more should we be doing better to manage issues in an increasingly complex environment, which is something you touched on, Mark, but we can expand on that a bit.
You want me to take that one first?
Go for it.
Well, you know,
Yes.
I know the data. Yeah, no, that's great. The data suggested that people, leaders feel very confident about their crisis management operation. And that I can see how that's true. You know, when I think of the crisis situation, it's two components. First, you know, being prepared, you know, going through the scenario planning, understanding like what are the different various ways that the world can shake out, and do we understand what our position is and point of view before we even have that moment? And then number two is what are the facts of the case and how we're going to respond to that. I think it does start with having two things: a good strategy, because fundamentally I feel like crisis can be kind of reactive. Strategy helps you be proactive in terms of lining up your resources, and it starts from, you know, the teams you're appointing. Having your strategy is where you're proactively driving the conversation and moving something forward, and that just crowds out, I think, the temptation to just react to the world. Reacting to the world can get very complicated fast and make you feel unmoored. So to me, even including crisis, it all starts with having a very clear strategy of where you want to go as an organization, and then lining up resources around that, and then having a very good crack, you know, crisis team that knows your position and knows how to run down the issue at hand.
Right, so it's having something really core, because as you said, crisis at this point come from all sides, from everything.
Yeah.
So it's having the core to react to these various ideas.
Yep.
Yeah, and
Lucy?
I'd agree with that, and Mark echoed that the real need for sort of the plans. I think and as you say, you know, especially in today's world, you know, there's a lot of different things that can be considered a crisis, and a lot of different opinions that can come to the table. You know, when you are dealing with that sort of in the moment scenario, there can be a lot of noise, a lot of pressures, both internally from employees to have an opinion or to, you know, to sort of take a position, but equally with externally, with customers, regulators, the media, etc. as well. So to Mark's point of having a plan, but having a while having diversity of voice around the table, so you're not just listening to, you know, your opinion being agreed with. It is about having a core group of people who, you know, have clearly defined roles that they meet on a regular basis, that there are clear agenda points going into the meeting and clear action points coming out of it, and that sort of, you know, the check-ins, you know, do we need to course correct in anything, is sort of really important at every step. And as Marcus sort of said, that, you know, putting that stuff into practice, role-playing scenarios, we never know quite where things may come from, but I think that muscle memory whereby people within the team and delegates within the team, right, because someone maybe on holiday one day, or, you know, maybe off sick, you know, other people within the team need to know what that playbook looks like.
I would love to just.
No, please.
Oh, sorry, Mike. Can I build on one thing Lucy said? It really resonated with me quickly. The idea of diversity of opinion and inclusion in the conversation. Your reaction to a situation is the product of the inputs, and the inputs are the people around the table. And I could give just think of any particular issue, and you sample 10 people and their view of it, where they come from, their background, their ideologies, all that really matters in terms of the product of how you react. And so I just want to stress that point. It's very important.
Another build that I'd love to share based on the data that we saw, and something that you mentioned, Lucy, is that even if you have the most robust issues map, there are going to be issues that you did not account for. What we actually saw in the data was that the frequency of simulations actually increased the confidence of leadership. So while we've been discussing the strategy is important, but really working that muscle, as you put it, to deal with unknown issues is also important. So for leaders, not just to run their crisis trainings once a year, twice a year, but when we saw that really get to the point that there were simulations happening monthly or more, the confidence in the ability to execute against and mitigate issues actually rose significantly. So it has a very real impact on performance and the ability to manage issues.
I can see where that confidence is important. Just as the outsider here, not the outsider, but not in your feet. I mean, the breadth of things that can cause crisis are somewhat unimaginable. So for
and
those of
as
you
Mark
in
said,
those walls,
yeah, and as Mark has sort of so rightly said, everyone is going to bring a different opinion to that table, and in organizations and outside, that can amplify really, really quickly. So having that clear direction of thought and the working group who are going to be focused on a project is important.
Lucy, I have a question for you. One of the issues that leaders highlight concern about is the shrinking newsroom.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, 69% of those surveys say that they are not engaging with the media enough, and 66% believe journalists do not portray their organizations accurately. In this changing landscape, how can leaders manage their reputation with these important stakeholders in the media?
Really, really important point, and really interesting to see the numbers that sort of came out of there. I think we're all cognizant of the changing landscape of media, very much in a 24/7 global media environment, the multiple channels that you can consider as media these days, but equally the pressures that journalists are sort of facing. So I think first step is to understand the landscape we are operating in. I think senior executives, other company sort of profiles, I like to see that they actually want to engage with media more. That makes my sort of job easier. But I think we also have to be very mindful that in the same way of in a crisis, you're going to have diversity of opinion. People will read articles in very different ways. So from a comms perspective, we have to sort of be very objective about the outcome from an article. But I think when you are deciding to engage with a journalist, engage with a publication, I think there are sort of three real things. As I said, to sort of understand the pressures that they're after, but the spokespeople have to be credible, right? They have to be bringing something to the table that's worth a journalist's time to sort of to be there. There's a story to sort of tell, and that they're bringing their true selves to the room. As well as sort of building relationships, right? You can't just expect to walk into a meeting with a journalist and they take everything on board and then just go and run with something. No, none of us have that sort of luxury. So it's actually investing the time outside of news flow arrangements to really understand, what the journalist has been writing about. Could we just sort of come and explain our sort of story? Assisting journalists with data and other sort of information that helps them, so that there is a really two-way flow of management and information to really build trust and relationships across the life cycle.
Right. So that kind of, I don't want to say old fashioned, but like old school media relations, getting to know each other, knowing who wants what matters, right?
I mean, it still really does. Just we can all come at an article and go, I don't like that headline, or that must mean they don't like us. People and publications will have different agendas. So again, bringing objectivity to something, absolutely calling out stuff when they're publishing stuff that's factually incorrect, but a lot of what we do is quite subjective. So I think where we can bring things to the table is actually improving ways in which we measure coverage, in which we measure the perceptions of sort of coverage. We're still sort of stuck in a very banal positive, neutral, negative sort of stance, and I think the tools that are becoming in place will actually help us bring better understanding to our stakeholders that we're dealing with of we can really see a dial shifting in terms of tone or whatever like that. So I think measurement is also key from a comms perspective anyway.
Yeah, because a lot of that is very nuanced in terms of what's produced.
Exactly.
So yeah. I don't have to tell you. Mark,
Sorry, I missed that question, Diane. Can I speak to that one quickly?
Something, no pressure, but if you wanted to add to that media relations.
Just one quick point, and I think that really speaks to me in terms of like the journalists, reporters, something has to be, credible, newsworthy story. They're people, understand their pressures, but I just want to add I think a lot about authenticity and building trust and value and connection with people, and how that comes through in our activities. And so when it comes to the media side, I think going local, like making sure that there's a very strong and active component where you are in communities with your story. And it's not just telling your story, it's engaging with people on the ground, because, we found with, just with local earned and local press, like they have needs for that information. There's a receptivity for those stories. And it's a way of getting your message out too. And I think building some connection with the community, which is really the core for a lot of brands, that's the core of their strength.
It's worth the investment.
Sorry, just to very quickly add, Dania, sorry, Mark, but you'll talk about the engagement. I think one point is also it's engagement in good times and bad, right? Just because when you've got something to say, you can go out, with a big story. You can't retreat when actually they're coming and asking you, potentially sort of difficult questions. There's a way of engaging with them, but it's a two-way street.
Appreciate that. Okay, Mark, got one for you here.
All right.
You ready? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, less than 50% of leaders think their corporate narrative is clear, differentiated, compelling, effective, accurate, or aligned with the corporate vision, mission, and values. What can leaders do to better align their narratives with their organization's objectives and more clearly communicate to stakeholders?
This is this data doesn't surprise me. That's a long list of items. Look, this is the challenge. I'd go to process. Let me just start there, because we all have, in any website, you can find mission, vision, values, you can find the narratives. But if you stop anybody in the hall and ask them, what are their mission statement? I think that you'd have people would struggle to articulate that. And I think of like, how do you build durability in a narrative? And number one, it starts with a strategy, right? And the narrative is the articulation of the strategy. They both talk about your aspiration. Where do you want to go and how are you going to get there? And the narrative is the way that you publicly express it. We can all build that thing, but the question is, how did we build it? And so first, I think, like, how was it built? Who was engaged in the process? What types of insights were brought in? Like when we do ours, I think the first question is like, are you looking at it as a communications exercise or as a strategy exercise? I would say if it's a communications exercise, it can come across as just words on a page, and it doesn't have a kind of an authenticity with people who helped build it. So number one, you have to have a big tent as part of a process of building your narrative. Like people have to be involved across functions, across your stakeholder groups, in informing what should this narrative be, because the narrative talks about what do you aspire to achieve as an industry? Who are we? What do we believe? How do we see the world? You can't cook that up in like a room with a couple people and then tell people we have a narrative, now go sell it. People have to sell it from the heart, number one. The second would be, good execution. And so once you have a narrative, and candidly, I will fully admit, I struggle with this today. I'm working through like, how do we make our narrative and our strategy more durable? How do we get it out into the world? I haven't figured all of it out yet. But number two is the good execution piece. So it gets to things like, are you training people? From a communications function, how are you bringing it to life? Like and one thing that we do is we take our narrative and we look, when we're planning our communications, we kind of have that up on the desk. We have that on the wall. Like these are the core pillars of value that we want to drive in our messaging. And like, we are constantly referring back to it. But that was an open question for us even, like, how do we use this thing? And so, a narrative has to be, once you develop it with a wide set of stakeholders and make sure that people are really invested in it. Two, having a good program to train people on how to use it and how do you apply it. From a process standpoint, I think that's how you build a durable one that would bump those numbers up higher in terms of the confidence that we have a narrative, we know how to articulate it, and it's working.
I've always thought that building narrative or building values when they're not like there from the ground up is among the hardest chores, not want to say chores, but challenges, because they're kind of nebulous, right? Until you put it together, in my opinion, or in my experience, it's putting words to what you do beyond the business, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And truly embedding and you know, for them within that sort of organization, as you say, Mark, rolling out a narrative, it's giving that sort of training as well, that everybody understands that how they can tailor it so that they can be authentic when saying it. That they're not just repeating words on a page. They truly buy into it, and they sort of add their own way of expressing it in a sort of world. And the values piece, it's got to run from the top to the bottom of the organization. It's got to be in everything you do, and the thought that goes behind everything.
Lucy, while I have you, you have the next questions. Okay. The lowest performing area of the index globally is ESG and sustainability strategy. Does this surprise you or not? Do you have any goals in this area or advice for leaders to improve performance in communicating ESG and sustainability?
Sure. I mean, I think ESG is thankfully becoming a bit much more mainstream. It's it is at the topic of every table for publicly listed companies. They're going to be asked about their practices from investors and stuff. I'm not surprised that the numbers are lower compared to other benchmarks in this perspective. And I think that we are certainly all still working through from a global perspective what it sort of means. But I think at the core, if we look at the governance bit and the way companies run, it goes back to things we've sort of talking about, having a true ethos within that. I think a lot of people traditionally have always sort of focused on the environment bit, but the governance and the way we operate has come through in the discussion so far is a really key part, and people that can see sort of tangibles from their perspective. But I do think again having a plan, having objectives, we at LSEG we have a clear strategy around sustainability. I'm pleased to say that unlike some organizations, we do have a dedicated team who are solely focused on this, both from delivering on our objectives, but bringing the different parts of the business together to make sure we will remain focused. 2 years ago, we took our climate transition plan to our shareholders. They voted on it, they approved it. We now have specific goals and a clear outset sort of to actually sort of track ourselves against progress, which we report on sort of every year. So it's not just we're doing it because we have to. From a reporting perspective, we go a lot deeper than that, and we sort of truly want to sort of be seen as a thought leader in this area. So you have to hold yourselves to account if you want to be a thought leader in that sort of respect as well. So I'm not surprised by the challenges within it, but I do think that looking across the broad spectrum, it will become even more just part of the day-to-day sort of stuff in as we sort of deal with reputation and governance as well.
Excellent.
Lucy, I find that so interesting. One of the things that we saw in the data is that while the strategy is often placed, some of those follow-up activities where you're really living the values are not always there. We saw that measurement against those goals was lacking. There's clearly communicated plans and statements about how we're going to get to those goals, but sort of that real-time measurement was not necessarily there for leaders. And regular tracking and reporting was also not as common as well as we would have wanted to see. So it's really difficult for organizations to know where they stand, how they're progressing, and how they are making progress if they're not doing those fundamental activities. So the fact that you tie those in to really living the values there and being a thought leader, I think is quite interesting, because it's one of the things that we actually saw lacking in the data.
And I think from our sort of perspective, it's not a nice to have, or it's not a thing to make everyone feel sort of comfortable. It really drives financial performance. It really drives shareholder value. So at a board level, they are absolutely focused on this, both as how we operate and holding ourselves to those high standards, but how we can help broader society in that sort of transition too.
Mark?
I will point to that.
Uh-huh.
It just got me thinking of some other data, and I think there has been this move, and Lucy knows a lot more about this than I do on the corporate side, but towards some kind of more purpose, a broader sense of like, what is value, what's shareholder value, what's the value to society, to the system, to people, and building that in. I was caught by a study that, and if Mike, if you don't mind, I mean, you got me thinking. Your study got me thinking of this Pew study recently around like what builds trust in corporations, and I was just struck by how much the kind of soft power, if you will, rises to the top. Things like being transparent, open, and honest, being responsible, environment, sustainability, behaving responsibly is like top drivers of a sense that you trust a business. And then what was down on the list was also surprising. It was things like it's well led, makes really good products, which you would think is like classic drivers of like business success. But when from the perception of the consumer in the world, it was some of the pieces that I think line up more to purpose, transparent, open, honest, reliable.
And I think it's just not, I completely agree. And I think it's not just, your external customers or investors, it's your people, right? People are looking at companies, you're looking to hire talent, they are judging the way to your point, what is the purpose of that organization? Does it align to the values that I have within it? That's increasingly becoming important. So not just external stakeholders, but internal, it's really, really key.
Excellent. Mark? We see that stakeholder insights from government to media to employees to consumers was often lacking. However, leaders that have better insights about their stakeholders are more confident about influencing stakeholder perceptions. How should leaders be approaching stakeholder insights and using them in strategy and tactics?
Well, I have to give a nod to my leadership who invested in the role that I have and my team has, which is, having an insights function, to start. I thought of this in a couple of ways, and I thought about this question. I look at the world as like two buckets of insights that you want to have. One is stakeholder insights. And this goes down to the very interpersonal, like with our families and friends, like the more we understand who they are and what motivates them, the more we can arrive at win-win scenarios, which is really what we're trying to do when we're persuading all of our stakeholders. But one, having a really rich stakeholder insights, like who are the most starts with the stakeholder map. Who's the most important and influential group to our business, to our organization? And I noticed in the data you said that there were a number of people who were not fully confident in the stakeholder mapping they did, but that's really important, right? Then putting pretty intentional research program around that just to understand, what are their values, not just how do they react to the thing, to either the policy ask or the business ask or the product, but what motivates them? What are the values that animate who they are? What are the problems that they want somebody to solve? And maybe that's what you can solve. Number two is environmental insights, which is ultimately, and I think this touches the crisis question from earlier and the sense of the world is very complex, is we have to understand where we're going and play for a chessboard 5 years ahead of us. Like if we are operating in the moment, we are mostly reacting to the moment. And so environmental insights, trends analysis, where you're looking, as we like to say, looking around the corner at where consumer preference is going, what could be the impact of technology like AI, which is totally revolutionizing thing, right? But there are a number of, where's the policy landscape going? And having a focused program that's looking around the corner and bringing that back into an organization to inform kind of big strategic questions that you have. The other thing I'd pull out on the kind of on the tactical side is, and this is something that I've worked through my entire career, is we often approach our audiences with the mindset. I think the temptation is to approach audiences with the mindset of, let me just convince them of the thing that I have, or the solution I have, or the policy ask I have, right? What we're really trying to do is tap into some shared sense of purpose. We say, meet people where they are. I'll give you an example. We do a lot of work with policymakers and regulators and such. To me, I think of, and I think this gets back to Lucy's point earlier about media. A policymaker wants to solve problems for their constituents, right? So my job is to understand what is the problem, what's the thing, where's the shared interest between what we are trying to solve from a policy standpoint, and how that policymaker can then see that is how that's very beneficial for their constituents. And it's when those line up when you can get something done. Where you run into trouble is when you're asking any of your stakeholders to do you a favor. Like, they want problem solved for them, they're not there necessarily to solve your problems. How this all connects back to insights is it starts with understanding, like, who are these people? What do they want? Getting a deep understanding of the stakeholders that you're working with.
Excellent. So we are nearing the end of our discussion, but we have a question first from our viewing audience. This is from Joel Moore. And the question is, tied to the shrinking newsroom, how important is it for brands and executives to share their views on their own channels, social and newsroom? And what are some impactful examples of where you see this happening? Either one of you want to take a stab at this one?
Yeah, I can kick off. I mean, I think as with, you know, sort of any interview that a spokesperson would have, right? An individual opinion is going to have more credibility than, you know, a post on a group company channel, right? People want to engage individually. They want to feel that they are gaining insights from whoever that sort of may be. So I think it's a very personal thing, but if you are, you know, if senior or any stakeholders, you know, do want to engage on a social media, it immediately elevates, you know, in terms of viewings, you know, and sort of real interaction with that, you know, purely compared to a company. But again, you have to be authentic in how you sort of do that, right? You can't just be, you know, trotting out, you know, things that are blatantly you would never say, or, you know, that so it's clearly been written by someone else. If you are going to adopt a social media thing, you know, it's you know, you don't have to be posting all the time, but you have to have a rhythm to it from that sort of perspective as well. So, but equally, if people don't want to engage, you know, from a social media perspective, I don't think it's right on any corporate comms to insist that they do, right? Because again, you know, it's that, you know, it stays as a footprint forever, no matter where they may go in future life from an organization. So they have to really truly want to do it. They can't, but if they do, it brings a lot more credibility to any message in a similar way that, you know, an interview with someone will be a lot better than just a press release.
Mark, care to comment on this one?
Yeah, I'll 100% agree. I mean, it's not something we should force on anyone because it gets to personal style and comfort level, because it has to be authentic, and so you can't force it. But absolutely, people want to engage with people, right? Very simply. And then when I look at our own data, our numbers are much higher in terms of engagement when it is our executives, in their words, conveying the message versus our more generalized, you know, organizational content. That doesn't surprise me at all. And so, to me, if the question is, if someone says, should I do this? My answer is absolutely yes. Like, let's find a way. But I think Lucy hit on this point, kind of the authentic in their voice piece. People are discerning. They can tell when something is not really, you know, conveying the heart and the mind of the executive in mind. So that's an important component to work out in terms of the tactical execution piece. But yeah, fully.
Okay. So we've covered a lot, but before I let anybody go, any closing comments, reflections, advice for the people that are navigating this landscape and reputation management and looking, you know, from the communications and the corporate affairs function, how they can be more empowered to be in charge, take ownership of this. Just a little question. Anybody?
I mean, I think from mine, and I think it's why you know, surveys and measurement tools such as the stuff provided by Sandpaper here, it's really important, right? Because it starts with the data. You know, you are able to measure yourselves against a broader sort of sector. And so data is really, really important. You know, data to the stakeholder management thing that Mark was talking about, data relating to crisis management, you know, it all underpins everything on from that sort of perspective. I do think, you know, something we mentioned right a bit at the beginning, you know, diversity of thought is really important. You know, having different voices, you know, using external advisors such as Sandpiper, whoever, to actually give an external lens, because again, you can slightly get in an echo chamber around a room, or if you've got a particular leader, who people don't feel that they can challenge, it makes it easier sometimes. But I do think that leaders should be receptive to hear from different people, but then be clear in their direction and and a way forward from that. But it's really important to have benchmark and good insights from data such as this.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think first, thanks to the Sandpiper team. This has been a fabulous opportunity and really rich study. It does start with the data. Maybe two pieces. One, invest in a very good strategy process. Make that a very intentional process where you're bringing in, to Lucy's points, a range of stakeholders, diversity of opinion. Because strategy is about choices fundamentally, and I learned that from my leaders. Like, the strategy process forces you to confront these really important questions that determine whether you're going to chase everything or whether you're going to focus really in a certain area, which gives people clarity of purpose. The second thing I would say is it's okay to get it wrong. I mean, I think the beauty of research and insights piece is that you're asking questions knowing that, like, sometimes you're going to get it right, sometimes you're going to get it wrong, but through that process, I'll just say message testing, for example. You test messaging in your communications. Some's going to work and some's not going to work, but you have to be open to the process of putting yourself out there and saying, hey, maybe the thing we've been using for these years isn't as effective as before. So research is a very important tool for kind of building a strong point of view, and again, giving you confidence and kind of moving forward. So but I just want to thank the team for the opportunity. I thought this was a great session.
No, thank you both for participating in such a informative and important conversation. So it's your time is well appreciated. I'm gonna let Michael say his closing statement or words and go from there.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Diana, for moderating this session. Really fascinating questions, and the discussion was so compelling. From understanding how leaders can be empowered to understanding more effective ways of driving our strategy to execution. Such a big finding from the study. So really a large thank you to both Lucy and Mark, not only for your support of the research and your time for the discussion, but also for empowering all of the attendees that we have with us today to think differently about the way that they are going about reputation management. For all of our attendees, one of the other questions we received is, when will this research be available? Please look out tomorrow. Our full report on the Global Reputation Management Index will be available tomorrow for download on our website. And we will also be speaking about the Global Reputation Capital Index tomorrow at the Provoke APAC Summit. So please do look out for more. Thank you all for attending. And again, a very special thank you to Lucy and Mark for all of the insights they've shared with us today.